Today's game features Greenblatt Programm, playing as white against Fischer, Robert James as black. Move 1. White stakes a claim in the center with e4, creating an opening imbalance. Black advances the pawn, a principled move, fighting for the center. White places the knight on f3, fighting for key central squares. Meanwhile, advances to g6, this is the Sicilian. An asymmetrical structure emerges. We're at move 5. White pushes the pawn to d4. Black now plays bishop moves to g7, keeping options open. White repositions the knight to c3. Black pawn takes pawn. White knight captures pawn. The position is unclear. Black places the knight on c6. White continues with brings out the dark squared bishop. Black completes minor piece development. White knight takes knight on c6. Black pawn captures the knight on c6. We're at move 15. White stakes a claim in the center with e5, gaining space. Black develops the knight naturally. White supports the center with f4. A subtle improvement. Black pushes to f6. White plays pawn strikes, capturing the pawn. Equal chances for both sides. Black plays knight captures pawn. At this point, finds a stronger diagonal. Continuing, black advances to d5, creating attacking chances. White plays repositions the bishop for better activity. It's black's turn. Repositions the rook. We're at move 25. White advances the pawn to b3. Black develops the knight to g4. White responds with develops the bishop to d4. Black advances to e5. Moving forward, white pawn takes pawn on e5. Black castles to safety. An error in judgment. White bishop takes the knight, preventing the opponent's plan. Continuing, queen moves to h4. And check. A forcing move. White pushes the pawn to g3. It's black's turn. Queen captures bishop, offering material. Move 35. White queen removes the queen, pressure on the kingside. Black plays bishop snaps up the queen. White moves the rook to f1, a game-changing blunder. So, takes the rook with the rook, and check. Forcing a response. White king snaps up the rook. Black advances to c5. Continuing, white bishop to f2. Black takes the pawn with the bishop, the technique wins the day. Continuing, white deploys the bishop to e1. At this point, black repositions the rook. Check. The king must move. An inaccuracy. We're at move 45. White king to g2. It's black's turn. Deploys the rook to f3. Bringing home the point. White continues with pawn moves to h3. Black boldly takes knight with the rook. The plan becomes evident. White bishop snaps off the rook, the win is within reach. Black bishop captures the bishop on c3. At this point, white deploys the rook to f1. Continuing, deploys the bishop to f5. White slides the rook to f2. Next, black pushes to h5. Move 55. White rook to e2. Black king to f7. A textbook endgame technique. White rook to e3. Black continues with repositions the bishop, converting with precision. White rook shifts to f3, the rook dominates. Black activates the king. Next, advances to c3. Black continues with plants the bishop on e5. White slides the rook to e3. This simplification helps. Meanwhile, advances the pawn. Move 65. White pawn takes pawn. A candidate move worth considering. Black plays pawn captures pawn. White deploys the rook to e1. Black advances to d3, simplifying the position. White continues with advances the pawn to h4. Interestingly, black advances the pawn. White brings the rook to d1. Black places the bishop on c3, a subtle improvement. White king moves to f2, the king becomes a fighting piece. Black bishop to g4. Move 75. White brings the rook to h1. Black deploys the bishop to d4, discovering check. White brings the king forward. Black activates the king. White plays advances to a3. Next, king walks to e4. At this point, deploys the rook to f1. Black king walks to d3. White continues with moves the king, creating unstoppable threats. Black steps the king to e2, a strong continuation. On move 85, white king moves to g2, what a blunder. Black now plants the bishop on h3. The game is essentially over. Checkmate in 5. And check. The win is within reach. White king snaps off the bishop. Black king snaps off the rook. There is now a forced mate in 3. So, white pushes to b4. Interestingly, pawn moves to d1. This creates a forced mate in 2. So, white king enters the battle. Black responds with queen hunts the enemy king. And check. A forcing move. Brilliant tactics. And here, white king marches up the board. Black responds with queen shifts to g2. Checkmate. Spectacular finish.